you so much for joining us for the Tom Twomey Local History Lecture. A little unusual this year. We're going to be en plein air, so to speak. I'm Sarah Davison, the president of the East Hampton Library. Now, without further ado, our leaders today are Helen Harrison, the director of the Paul Krasner House and Studio just down the road in Springs, and she's also a wonderful writer, and Hugh King, who almost needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway.
Keep going.
He is the town crier, a local historian, and the direct site manager for historic properties in the village of East Hampton. So I'm going to just turn it over to you guys and just take it away.
Yeah, Huey's going to start off and give you a little background about the cemetery.
Okay, Green River. We don't really know where the name comes from, but Dan Miller of the general store, you know where the Springs General Store is, Dan Miller used to run the Springs General Store. He called it the half store because he only had half of what you wanted. So he said that Green River got its name because people from this area went to Green River, Vermont, and when they came back, that's all they talked about. That's all they talked about, so they named this area Green River. That's not true, okay? And yeah, I'm going to give you some reasons why, okay? This place was called Green River Road in 1860. There were only 5 houses down here, and 8 men went to the Civil War from this area, okay? Now, Green River is part of, Springs was really divided into 4 sections. I didn't realize this until we started doing this. This is Green River. Over there is East Side. Then you have Fireplace, and then the area over by 3 Mile Harbor was called Kingstown for some reason. I have no idea. Okay?
Well, you mean you didn't live there?
No, I
back
didn't.
in
I didn't live there.
1860? Oh, I'm sure.
In 1860, I wasn't here either, Helen.
Sure.
Okay. So the road received a coat of oil in 1913. We know that. There was supposed to be a survey of this cemetery in 1902. There are some graves in here that go back to the 1860, 1865. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the person lived down here and they got buried in their backyard and then they moved them here? Or were they buried someplace else and moved here when the cemetery opened up? I don't know, but we're talking about the very early 1900s that we had a cemetery here. Now, there was a Green River Cemetery Association. They held meetings and elected officers. They had benefits at bingo, turkey and clam chowder suppers, and strawberry festivals. And where did they have these benefits?
Here at the cemetery?
Ashwag.
Ashwa Hall, right, okay? Now, if Helen wanted to get a full-size plot in 1949, she had to pay $50. Now, if you wanted a half-size plot, it was $30. So I don't know what a half-size plot or a full-size plot. If a full-size plot was 2 people and you got a half-size plot, then your husband was on your own. Or a full-size plot and a half-size plot, you could maybe interchange them, but that's what they were in 1949, all right? Asa B. Miller was the president of the Cemetery Association down here. He lived in Green River. And finally, John Benetos lived down here. This is not a great story, okay? He was sent to Yaphank. There was not an asylum place, but something sent down there for people who had problems. They went to Yaphank. Then he was shipped to Southampton Hospital. Then he went down to the Hunting Rest Home. And then he went to Baker and Lester's, bought a butcher's knife, and killed himself.
Ooh.
I know. I can't believe it. And it came from here. Now, I don't know where his grave is. I haven't been able to find it yet.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. And that's all I have. It's all up to you now. We've got Green River started.
Well, one thing you did not mention is that it's not just the artists and writers and famous people who are buried here. This is really a local cemetery, and it's non-denominational. It's not affiliated with any religious organization. So you have people from all different walks of life. You've got the Kings, the Millers, the Bennetts, the Edwardses, and the local families, but you've also got lots of people from away. And one of the most prominent that you can see right here is Alfonso Osorio, who was born in the Philippines. Now, Alfonso was one of 6 sons of a very wealthy sugar refinery company. And he was buried here, or I should say part of him is buried here. He was cremated, and part of his ashes are here, and part of his ashes are on his estate, the Creeks, in Wainscott. Have any of you ever been to the Creeks? Were you around when Alfonso was alive? Oh yeah, he used to have tours. He had this amazing pinetum where all the evergreens and things. And you can still see it if you go out in a boat on Georgia Pond. You can look back and see the estate, but you can't see it from the road. He bought it in 1951, and he and his companion Ted Dragon lived there until Alfonso died. So this, and on the back of it, you'll see that there's also an inscription for Ted, who is partly buried here and partly buried in the Roman Catholic Cemetery, Most Holy Trinity, over on Cedar Street. So this is they were divided up and each taken to their own respective place. And over here next to them, Harold and May Rosenberg. Harold and May Tabak, she was an author. Harold was an art critic and a respected teacher. They were the first of that group, of that post-war group, to buy property here in Springs on Neck Path. They bought a little cottage in 1944. It was a summer cottage. And that's where, when Jackson and Lee came out the following summer with some friends to stay on Louse Point, they were just renting. They would come over here on their bikes and visit with Harold and May. And that's what gave them the idea to move out here. Lee initially wanted to move here just for the winter. What was she thinking? But Jackson said no, that was no good. But when they got back to town after Labor Day, he changed his mind. And he said we should move here permanently, buy a house and settle down. And she thought he was crazy because they didn't have any money. The reason they were on Louse Point was because their friends were renting the cottage and they just kind of clubbed in with them. But that little cottage on Louse Point is still there. I think it's number 94. I'm not exactly sure, but there's a little cluster of 3 cottages. I think it recently sold for $1.5 million. It was just a fisherman's shack back then, up on stilts. So that's Harold and May. They were the pioneers in this neighborhood. And then, of course, once Jackson and Lee moved here, and they were here permanently, they had a full-time residence, then, of course, they started attracting their friends. So let's go up and see some.
There was a store down at the end of Louse Point
That's
at one time,
I
right?
missed that.
And maybe that's why they could stay down there too. If they had a store, right?
There was a little, I think there was even a little hotel.
Yeah, there was something called something fort, which was right on the corner. It was like a big roast place before by the time they got there.
I saw those photographs online. They're really good.
Yeah.
So over here we have Roger Wilcox. And his wife. Now, Roger, this headstone, head thing, head sculpture, whatever you want to call it, was designed by Ken Nolan's brother. Come back to me. Anyhow, Roger and his wife, she was the lover of Fernand Léger, the surrealist, who came out here in 1938 at the behest of the Murphys. And Léger, after the war, went back, but Lucia stayed. And she married Roger, and they had property in Amagansett. So they were also among the very first to really put an artistic beachhead here. So we will go.
We're going to just stop right here at the Civil War thing just for a second. Is that right? Helen? Yeah. We'll have to come back.
Neil Nolan, who came back to he had done
This guy, William Bailey, served in the American Civil War. He died in 1902, and he's here. How did he get here? Was the cemetery open then? Was he living here? Was he moved? We don't know. And there's another guy down here, but they didn't put a flag next to George Lester. And he died in Tennessee in a prison during the Civil War too. But they the flag is gone. So we won't stop there. Okay, go ahead. There was a survey around 1902. I can't find it. I don't know. I read it somewhere, and I don't know where. Yeah, I mean, Carlton would say it was the early 1900s too, but where's the proof, you
That's
know?
a good way of plugging it.
Yeah, yeah. Where you going?
As you can see from your chart, if anybody doesn't have one, okay, so we've got one here. We have lots of artists buried in this central section here, and along the side as well. We have Miriam Shapiro, the feminist artist, and her husband Paul Brock. They are over on that side. And you can see we have the Bennett family, local people mixed in.
You're the king.
Are they your kings or
I don't
other
know.
kings?
William F. King, probably. My Uncle Abner's buried back there, so.
Well, one king who's not buried here is Bill
Bill
King,
King.
the sculptor. He's from Florida.
Why isn't he buried here?
I don't know. Maybe they took him to the family plot.
Oh.
Are all the plots sold now?
I believe so.
Sold out?
Yeah. Well, Marion White, who just recently bought a plot for her companion, excuse me, said that she got the last plot. I heard that the Rosses have a big plot of land. Oh, you'll see that. Oh, yes. We will go to the Ross family estate.
And as people walking, be careful, don't trip over the headstone.
All right, now you're going to go in there, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we got another king, more kings over here. This is lousy with kings. Look at all the royalty.
Okay, you want to go that way? No matter there, we'll go here,
Right.
You go get that done. I think White is way back in the corner. He told me about that.
Oh, wait, she's not there. She's alive. But her Alfonso.
Yes, I think like way in the back, the last.
So up here you see Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner. Now, when he was buried in 1956, this was all woods back here. If you see photographs of back in the old days, you'll see that there was a fence, and then there was nothing but wood. And the story was that he wanted to be buried facing the woods because he loved nature, he loved these beautiful surroundings and springs. So that was his headstone. And his feet were facing the woods, so he could look at the woods. Well, Lee wasn't satisfied with the stone. She thought it was not imposing enough. And the story is that she asked her friends to be on the lookout for a better rock. This one came off the pile behind the Pollock house that Jeffrey Potter dug up for Jackson in the spring of 1956. So Lee said, find me something better. And one of her friends, John Little, who's also buried here, was on his way to the dump one day, and he spotted this monster rock. And he said to Lee, I think I found your rock. And she went and had a look at it and said, yes. So poor Jeffrey had to get his backhoe and dig the thing up. And this is only half of it.
Oh my God.
If you come to visit the studio, you'll see we have a photo of it coming in on Jeffrey's low loader. The thing is humongous. And Jeffrey was over 6 feet tall, and it towers over him. In fact, it was so heavy that it weighs about, 5 or 6 tons. He had to regrade the road because the tires dug in so deep. So, okay, they put it in, and they try to position it. I mean, positioning a 5-ton rock is not a child's play, but apparently it wasn't in the right position for Lee. She wanted it turned a certain way. And remember, there's a coffin lying there. So one of the Cullen brothers was helping Jeffrey, and he said, if we move this freaking rock any farther, we're going to pop Jackson out like a cork. So they finally decided, leave it alone. And then that became his footstone. But the headstone stayed on the property, and it became Lee's gravestone. The problem is that it looks like his footstone. Like she's buried at his feet, like Rosette. Don't like that at all.
You have to be symbolic of the
She did not. Well, see, that's the thing, it seems like she's subservient to him and all that. although if you get in just the right position and crouch down a little bit, the stones, foreshorten, they look okay. But it sends a bad message to me. I don't like that.
Are they buried feet to feet?
No, she was cremated.
Oh.
So there's only one coffin in the plot.
Okay.
Oh, and here's a library story. When I was researching my murder mystery about his death, I went to the Long Island collection and I found that they have the Yardley and Williams funeral record book. It's like a ledger. And when you open it up, there's Jackson Pollock and the price of the coffin, the price of what it costs to advertise the death, the paid death notice, and all the other incidental expenses of the funeral. You flip it over and you have Edith Metzger, who died with him in the car. It's really kind of eerie. But it's a this book is absolutely wonderful because it has the real records of everybody who went through the Yardley and Williams funeral home.
Another book, Helen.
I think I shot my bolt on this one.
Definitely worth taking a look a little closer and filming the photo a little closer. Why are all the stones on there?
Here's Henry Geldzahler, who was the curator at the Metropolitan and also the New York City Cultural Commissioner.
Someone asked, why are the stones on the...
Oh, well, it's a Jewish custom when you go to a Jewish cemetery to take a little prayer with you. And in order to keep it from blowing away, you would put a pebble on it. So now it has become secularized, and people just go to the beach and pick up a stone and leave it as a little mark of respect. Well, we have paint cans, you'll have brushes, you'll get beer bottles, all kinds of things that accumulate on the grave. Stan Vanderbeek, the filmmaker, obviously, a filmmaker. In fact, his wife Joanna told me that he died in the 80s, and it wasn't until the new section opened up that she was able to bury him. She had him on the mantelpiece. So this section all opened up in Houston. That 110 plots over on that side were purchased by the Ross family.
110 plots?
110 plots. And I want to tell you that the Green River Association was only too happy to sell 110 plots all at once. But, needless to say, the neighbors weren't too pleased. And, of course, now the whole thing is sold out because everybody grabbed them up as quickly as possible. A plot, when I bought mine, was $700. 91. I don't know what the last one you put up.
50 in 1949.
Yeah, I know. Only I've been thinking. Yeah, because I don't know. 50 years old, but I think I thought of that.
Is the Ross family that big?
No. No, it's kind of a, but anyway, they wanted to have, a grassy area. They have given some plots to others. Alan Kula, the director, who was a friend of Steve Ross, who was killed on the expressway, he's buried over there. And Kiniston McShine, who was the curator at the Museum of Modern Art, he's also buried in that neighborhood. But the most recent plots are down in this area, the last ones to be sold. And Marion Weiss told me that Alex's gravestone has just been installed, so we're going to have a look at that. But you'll see plenty of other artists up in this neighborhood. Philip Pavia, the sculptor. And also you'll notice on Philip's grave, there is a space for his wife, Natalie, who is still very much with us. So some of the stones have names of people who are not deceased. And there are also a couple of people buried here who never had a home or studio here, a couple of artists. And one of them is Hannah Wilkie. here because it got famous as the artist cemetery. So even people who didn't live locally could buy a plot. You didn't have to be a local resident. And so she decided she wanted to be buried among the artists. There we go. Yeah, there's a couple of graves that don't have the actual names on the stones, or some that are flush. And Kinniston Shines is like that. And unfortunately, the way it's sited, dirt will wash onto it when it rains. So it covers up the name, so it's a little hard to locate some people. So if you're looking for your own plot and you don't know where it is, you have to go and get a copy of the map. That's what you need to do. Go over to town hall and get the map. Yeah, here we are. I'm sure many of you knew Ruth Applehaw, who was the director of Guildhall for 17 years. She was a friend of Lee Krasner. She wrote her master's thesis on Krasner and lived with her in the Paula Krasner house in the 1970s for a month. And she told some very cute anecdotes about it. And when I met her and she told me that she had been lived in the house, I said, well, Ruth, you have to come and give a talk for us. You know, the natural thing, right? She said, well, I don't know where all my notes are. Well, 17 years later, she finally found the notes and decided to write a memoir about her time with Lee. And unfortunately, very sadly, right about the same time, she was diagnosed with leukemia. So she lived for another 2 years. She completed the book, and it actually came out like a week before she died. It's called Lee and Me, and I highly recommend it. And she tells some very cute stories about being with Lee, who was a real character. And behind her is Alex Musso, whom I mentioned earlier. And this is the most recent burial, and according to Marion, this was the last plot that was available.
Ruth was Parish Museum, right?
No,
Guildhall, sorry.
Alex was a World War II combat artist.
That's
and-
right. That's what the person told me at Maine Beach. Somebody told me at Maine Beach the story how it's the last one, or
Yeah,
they got it,
that's what
and he was a
Marion
combat photographer
He
during
was,
World.
he was one of the artists, and he wrote a memoir also, which is very interesting about his
Well, I'll
career.
tell him I saw this. That'll be great.
Yeah, so that one just went in. So over here, if we go around this way, we will go
Gallery's not
past
taking anything, is it?
Charlie Blockman. The architect is over here.
You know that I've been trying to find out the history of the Hedges Inn, and of course Henry Soule was running it, and he had a secret chef.
Yeah.
There was Franny.
You know how they came over here? It was for the 1939 World's Fair. They were the chefs at the French Pavilion. And of course, when France was invaded in 1940, they just stayed on. And they opened a restaurant in Manhattan called Le Pavillon.
Right.
The Pavilion.
And he came out. He owned the head. You know where the Hedges Inn is, right? They owned it twice. Henry
Really?
Soule. Yes, he left it, and he went back, and then Frenet got mad at him. The way they had an argument about something I can't remember. Oh God. Yeah. I didn't realize it.
It came out for the World's Fair.
Ritzenberg, another artist.
We're gonna go. We're gonna retrace our steps when Helen gets done over here.
Barbara Goldsmith was very generous in the Baldwin Hampton Library.
She wrote the book about Virginia.
I love this. She has her own book.
Victoria Woodhull. She wrote the book about Victoria Woodhull. the first woman to run for president?
Uh-huh.
Oh, she gave a talk at Guild Hall.
Yeah, she used to support authors.
She would always be at the fair every
Yeah.
year, the book fair. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, a shout out to Authors Night. It was so wonderful this year. It was so great to be back in person.
One of our local authors. We kindly featured.
And up in the corner there is where Charlie Guafni and Tino Nivola and Kinnison and Shine are all over in that neighborhood.
Oh, we missed
And I am there.
Yeah, right around here.
Two places at
Not
once.
yet.
Nice location.
Yeah, I thought so.
That's some primo real estate.
Well, it was funny. I came up here with Jeffrey Potter right after the section was opened, and he took one look at it and said, "Golf course." He was horrified that all the trees had been cut down. Of course, things have grown up now since that time, but it did look pretty naked. Oh, that's fun.
We want to do the Moranville
Yeah.
while we're here, so we have to come back up. Those two stones up are the Moranvilles, and they had two daughters. They lived in Springs, and on Springs Fireplace Road in their garage, they started a little canning business. And they wound up on North Main Street during World War II with a clam chowder and canning factory. And what you did is, you know where the cleaners is, I think it's right to the left. I think that's where they were. And you would have a victory garden, you take your vegetables down there and they would can them and then send them overseas
Oh, wow.
down there. And there's articles in the Star all about them. There they are, the Moranvilles. And two of their daughters went to spring school, and one of them is still alive. Never mind.
Well, before we go, let me point out Pauline Field, who, Jim Field, of course, is one of his in-law aunts. And she was very helpful to us in the early days of the Pollock House, because her relatives, the Howards, owned the Pollock House from 1890 to 1926. And she told me that she used to go up there. They lived in town. They would come up to Springs to visit the uncle and the aunt, and they would have to stay overnight because it was such a long trip.
Oh, yes, you're going to hear about that. That's exactly right.
So I said, well, what did you do if you went upstairs and went to bed? It was so cold, there was no heat upstairs. And she said, well, we put a brick on the stove and took it in bed with us. But she's the one who told us what the studio was originally. It was a storage barn for fishing equipment.
What was her maiden name? Pauline?
Emmett. I think she was an Emmett.
Pauline Field. So she, I didn't know that. Wait a minute, Jimmy Field. You're talking about Jimmy Field? The painter?
No,
okay.
no, she wasn't. She was a nurse by
okay.
profession. Not the hospital. Well, maybe she was in Moranville because it's Pauline M. Field, but that is definitely she.
Oh, well, yeah. So she was Pauline Moranville.
Must have been.
Can you imagine? There's a great point. The way women's lineage gets wiped away from our history is on tombstones.
Yeah, 'cause
You'll
they got
say,
married.
Mary, wife of Tom Jones. You don't know what Mary's last name was, but there it is,
Yeah.
Pauline Field.
Yeah. Oh, and there's Fred Lake, for whom the Merrill Lake Estate is named. The nature reserve up on Fireplace Road.
And Barbara Hale, his colleague,
Right.
one of the Nature Conservancy founders.
Right. And the marker, I believe, was designed by Tino Nivola.
Yeah. And next to him, I'm just going to insert my friend George Whitney, who bought everything at thrift shops and on sale, and his stone says 30% off.
I love that.
Oh, Paul Lester, the architect, Winterboard Penthouse, and John Giffens, who is not here yet.
Uh-huh.
He's waiting for me.
Okay. Okay, let's go over here. Wait a minute, we're going to do her. Where is she? She's over there. Okay. All right, come here. We're going to do Ferris Talmadge.
Everyone gather around.
Ferris Talmadge. His book, Springs in the Old Days, is a wonderful window into the past because what he talks about, he actually lived. But he was way ahead of soil conservation in this town. He preached that. He went to school at Oshawa Hall, and during the hurricane of '38, he went down, he told the town he'd clean up the trees in Northwest if he could take them, and he used them to, he wanted to make cabbage crates for his cabbage, but they wound up at Yaphank, building the center there for during World War II. All right, Ferris Talmadge was way ahead of his time, and now here's the best part of the story. Let's go over here and see Mary Fulford. Okay, she's right here. She's very shy, so she put flowers in front of her face. Okay. Now remember, Helen told you, I told you that we didn't believe people went to Green River, Vermont, from Springs. Well, listen to this. This is the Jolly Girls Club, and Helen said she would have been a member if she was here during this time. This is 1925. Helen wasn't here. Don't let her fool you. So the Jolly Holly Girls Club, the members went to Ocean Beach Monday, where they held their annual outing. The members of the club were taken to Sag Harbor by automobile, and then thence by boat and trolley to Ocean Beach. A picnic dinner was served at noon, after which they returned to New London, where they spent the afternoon in various ways. The members are Kitty Bonnet, Mabel Conklin, Mary Miller, Lois Talmadge, Jenny Hackett, Bessie blah blah, Mary Fulford. The Jolly Gollies Girl Club was organized last February with the following officers, blah blah blah. Now why is this a big deal? Because what Helen was telling you. Stuart Miller of Green River was in the village selling turnips. It made the paper. Okay. Rushton Foster, who has been laid up for the last 3 weeks, has returned to work at Halsey's Garage. Halsey's Garage is where Stop and Shop is now. Daniel Miller, Bud King, and Silas French spent Thanksgiving at their homes here. Because of the heavy winds, they were unable to get to Gardiner's Island until Sunday. Mr. and Mrs. Cook Talmadge and daughters have returned from their visit to Sagaponack. So you see, going to Ocean Park Beach in New Jersey was a big, big trip because every time you went anywhere, it was in the village. I mean, it was in the paper. All right, that's all.
Those were the days when.
And this is Mary Fulford. Mary Fulford, Ferris Talmadge's mother died when he was 2, and she helped raise him down here at Willow Hill in Springs. Okay? She was a member of the family here.
Well, we have 2 writers here. We have A.J. Liebling and his wife, Jean. Jean Stafford. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's very hard to read the slate, but he was a writer and a noted gourmand.
Do you know the assemblage of the fleur-de-lis and the snowflake?
Well, I assume the fleur-de-lis is for her love of France, and I don't know about the snowflake.
Her love of snow.
No, that was him. Oh, yeah, that's him. Yeah.
Helen would know.
Maybe he was just here.
Where are the levers?
I don't know.
I just want to do 2 more.
Well, I got 2 more. I got 2 over here, and that
Okay, let's
is-
go over here because Jonathan Miller's over here too, so we could get him in. Oh, look at this.
We have the poet Frank O'Hara and Patsy Southgate, who was his close friend. The inscription on his tombstone here says, "Grace to be born and live as variously as possible," is actually a reference to Grace Hardigan, the artist, who was also a close friend. And the Coke bottles, he wrote a poem called "Having a Coke with You," and so when people come to his grave, they often bring Coke bottles. And Patsy, of course, was married to Peter Matheson, and Hidden Springs. Now, Frank did not live here. He visited very often. He was killed on Fire Island in a freak accident with a dune buggy that ran over him and killed him. He was only 40 years old. But because he was friendly with so many of the artists, he wound up being buried here. And across from him, over on the other side there, you see that very tall black stone? That is Stuart Davis. Now, Stuart Davis never visited Springs. He did not like the abstract expressionists. He called abstract expressionism a belch from the unconscious. And I couldn't figure out why was he here. So I asked Ray Ferrin, who told me, because she was friendly with his wife, Roselle. And she said, well, Roselle did not get along with the family, so they were not going to bury him in the family plot down in Philadelphia. And they summered in Gloucester. And she said, who visits Gloucester? So they bought a plot here, and they put him in here. And the funny thing is that it's this big black steeler, right? Well, in front of him, you see that little white stone on the ground? That's the grave of Ad Reinhardt, who also was not a local artist, but he's the one who quipped that all the artists were dying to be buried in Green River, and sure enough, here he is. But he was known as the Black Monk. If you're familiar with his art, it's very monochromatic, very just black on black, and he winds up with the white stone. And Stuart Davis, who did very colorful, bright, abstract cubist pictures, he winds up with the black stone. So go figure. So we'll go down and have a look at Elaine de Kooning.
Well, do you know the significance of these Coke bottles?
Yeah, because he wrote a poem called Having a Coke with You.
Oh, okay.
So people would come here and have a Coke with him and leave the bottle. Did you drink Coke bottle?
Okay, this is an extra added attraction I found out while we're going down here. It's Peter Boyle. Yeah, now Peter Boyle lived on one of the leafy lanes in Amagansett. If you go down any of those lanes, it's not leafy anymore, okay? But he lived close to Kathleen Turner. So I did a little research. He was in this movie called Joe.
Right.
It was a big hit, but he got upset with all the violence, so he turned down the part that Gene Hackman had in the French Connection. Right.
Yeah.
Then he played the part in Young Frankenstein. Right. Yeah. And he did a number called Dancing at the Ritz.
Putting on the Ritz.
Putting on the Ritz. Well, that's where he met his future wife, and he asked her out on a date while he was dressed in the monster costume. And he was also an advocate. He actually had empathy and worked with, at times, Jane Fonda in the anti-war movement.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he just disavowed any of those other kinds of movies, but he was on Everybody Loves Raymond for a long time, and he had a tremendous career, and he lived in Amagansett.
Yeah, he used to come to the Pollock House.
I love this guy.
Yeah, he would bring his friends to the Pollock House.
He would?
Saw him there quite a bit. Yeah.
Now, I thought he lived at Mayankoma Hall, but he didn't. The guy who lived at Mayankoma Hall was on Charlie's Angels. Dennis? Something. So he didn't live there, but he lived on one of those lanes. Hand Lane, Mayankoma, Hedges, or Meeting House. I don't know which one it was, but Kathleen Turner had a house on Bluff Road at one time, right? Yeah.
Windmill house.
No, the windmill's further down.
It's further down. The windmill's on the corner. Well, it's not a windmill, folks. It's a bow mill. Yeah. Okay, now, I don't know much about Dane Dixon.
Oh, he was an assistant of Bill's.
Yeah, the only time I saw those two together, I don't know how they got anything done.
Yeah, I think they were pretty well oiled.
I found in the paper that he had a studio, worked in the studio on Fort Pond, on the corner of Fort Pond and 3 Mile Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
There's an art. He
designed that sign there.
He did?
Yeah. Which one? The sign,
Is it the art shop?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, there he goes. And he's. Wait a minute. Where is he?
And I.
There he is
I
over
actually
there.
put
Yeah.
that cross
Oh,
on the.
you made that, or you just put it?
Actually, I didn't make it, but he was always concerned that everybody spell his name correctly. It's not Dixon, it's Dixon. apostrophe S-O-N. So since the sign had his name spelled wrong, I corrected it on the little.
Wilfred Logbound's name was wrong on his tombstone.
But his name is spelled wrong on his street.
Yeah, he's Wilfred with 2 I's, but they all spelled it with an E.
Are you saying his name is spelled wrong on the stone?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. His real name is D-I-X-S-O-N.
How could that happen?
Well,
I mean,
people just misspelled his name.
you would think a relative would have.
He didn't have many relatives. He was a friend of my late husband, who's buried over there, and he was always adamant that people were misspelling his name. It should be
Horrible that it winds up on his
D-I-X-S-O-N.
grave.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what you resist persists, right?
Yeah, right.
Interesting. Do you know that story?
Little Masa, she had a boarding house right across the street there,
Oh.
That's why it's called
on Lila's Lane.
Yeah. Lila had 3 daughters, all went to spring school, and they were all in my class, and boy, were they great. It was great to have students like that. I could still be teaching.
Abraham Ratner and his wife Esther Gentle, and their son Alan Leeper, who is dead, but I guess
All right, now we've got some kings. That nothing to do with me. Okay.
Oh my gosh, more
Okay.
kings.
There were 3 restaurants in the village of East Hampton. There was the Mamador, which was right next to the movie theater,
Oh, yeah.
and that burned down in 1965 when the movie theater. That was run by Donald King, okay? And this is Alfred Payton Speed King. He had a restaurant on Newtown Lane. What's there now is that famous historic landmark, Aryan, A-E-R-I-N. If you look at that building on Newtown Lane, that's where Speed's restaurant was. And then further down where the other historic landmark, Bruno Cucinelli is, was Remin Mills restaurant, run by Remington King and his wife Millie. And now, of course, they were all gone. But at one time, there were 3 restaurants. And the Marmador is, of course, the famous restaurant from the days of Happy Days. When they went into the soda place in the Happy Days, that was what the Marmador was like to us in the 1950s. Mostly the kids from East Hampton went there, because I was from away. I was from Amagansett.
you don't hold it again.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I'm going to have to run.
Big round of applause for Helen Harrison. Give me one extra map. Who didn't get a map?
May I have a map for one of my former students who's here?
Step right up.
Actually, we have 3 of his former students. Different generations.
Well, you can share that. I will share it with you.
Thank you very much.
People were recently buried there.
Where? Which one? Ran a little bit over. No, he died there. No. Oh, you know why? The wife just died. Yes, Judy just died.
Yes, that's what
why.
I'm saying. It's his beloved mother.
Right.
But no date yet.
Well, she died, so they'll be putting the date up.
Do they remove the stone to put the date on, or do they actually do it on the site? I always wondered.
I don't know.
You do have to fully remove the stone.
You have to remove it.
Really?
You can see deer walk
What
right
time
across.
is it?
You got 247.
Have we had enough?
Do you have anything more to say?
We got to go walk all the way over there. We can go. We can go.
We're going to conclude the tour. Thank you all for coming. Please feel free, to revisit your favorites or find a missing friend and enjoy.
Thank you so much, Hugh.
Thank you. Thank you, Hugh. Hugh King.
I didn't know reservations. Next time.
Yeah.
And he gave the land for St. Peter's Chapel in 1881 on the east side. And that church was just built for the people on the east side to go to. And it was built before the Presbyterian Church. It was built in 1882. And he gave the land for the church, and unfortunately the first service in the new church was a burial service for his daughter. He died, and here are all his children who passed away. Wait a minute. Thank you, Scott, for doing this. Hold it. Can't find them now. All right. I'm going to give you their names. No. Okay, you ready? Okay. Holder died at 8. Maggie Elma died at 5. William Allen died at 1. Catherine died at 2. William drowned at Fort Pond Bay. Frank died as an infant. Cecilia died young. And Catherine died in 1881, the first service in the East Side Chapel.
Wow.
How about that?